Okay, we're here at Rue 57 Restaurant in Manhattan, and I'm sitting here with Charles Thomas, who is winemaker at Quintessa, which is one of the iconic wineries from the Napa Valley region of California, and specifically, they're located in the AVA that's called the Rutherford AVA. Charles, thanks for sitting down to chat with us today.
Glad to be with you.
Thank you. I know that Quintessa is famous for its cab-based wines, but I wanted to start off talking today about Sauvignon Blanc, because I understand it's been a pretty significant part of your career at the different places that you've been winemaker, and you're now making one called Illumination. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your philosophy in making Sauvignon Blanc in general, and in particular about Illumination.
My interest in Sauvignon Blanc started certainly when I was at Robert Mondavi Winery, and when I was a winemaker there, we developed the Toquelin Fumé Blanc Reserve, and eventually came out with the I Block. And it's something, Sauvignon Blanc at its best is one of the great white wines of the world.
Right.
Historically, it hasn't been that exciting to a large extent, but what we've seen over the last 20 years is that vintners in Napa Valley who pick the right sites, the right soil, the right winemaking can produce a spectacular wine.
Absolutely, and it was Mondavi who really put Fumé Blanc on the map from Napa Valley and so forth.
Yes.
So you were kind of there for the genesis of all of that.
And I saw how great it could be, and it's something that Augustin had wanted to make a Sauvignon Blanc and had planted a small acreage on the property and produced a very exciting wine, and it's something that I've taken over and really tried to continue what he had started and make it as terrific as we can.
Great. Now, I saw on your website a little something about using concrete eggs as fermentation tanks. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, this is something that I was on a trip in France back in 2002 investigating the use of concrete fermenters in red wine, actually.
Okay.
And when I visited this tank producer in Burgundy, right outside his front office, he had two, I guess the only way to describe them is very cute-looking concrete eggs that held, maybe 80 gallons of wine. And I thought about it, and basically I said to myself, I got to get me a couple of those.
Oh, cool.
And he had made them originally for Chapoutier, who was using them to make Northern Rhone white wines. And I rationalized to myself that if they work for that, they'd probably work pretty well for Sauvignon Blanc, where maybe with the porosity of concrete, you get the richness of a barrel fermentation without any oak character, which would mesh wonderfully with Sauvignon Blanc.
I see, and that gives it a very different character from fermenting in stainless steel as
exactly.
well. Then.
It's got a little bit more roundness and richness, but it still has a beautiful, distinctive, bright Sauvignon fruit character.
Okay, and is there anything special about the egg shape as well, or is that just an aesthetic thing?
They certainly look cool, and for Chapoutier, one of the ideas that he had was that he's been a biodynamic producer for a number of years, and in biodynamic thought, the egg shape concentrates energy in the wine, and they caught my attention, so maybe he was onto something.
Yeah, no, it sounds cool, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the wine.
Yeah, I've been very happy with the results that I've seen so far at Quintessa.
The next wine I wanted to ask you about is Faust, which is a Cabernet Sauvignon, which is kind of, I guess, in my mind, kind of the things that I knew that Quintessa was famous for.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit about how it's different from the Quintessa blend and what you're trying to do with Faust?
I think the idea for Faust it originated when we built the Quintessa winery in 2002. We actually had been making wines at another winery for Quintessa before that, but when we built our own winery, beautiful gravity flow winery, terrific winemaking setup. Augustin, I guess, going against his original thought of not having just a single wine from the property, agreed with his son Augustin Francisco that it might be worth having a wine from some vineyard blocks that weren't stylistically compatible with Quintessa. They were wines that were more classically Napa Cabernet, a little bit more fruit-forward, black fruit, maybe without the finesse and elegance that Quintessa certainly has.
Right.
And once he convinced himself that this was a legitimate style of wine to produce, that was the genesis of Faust in 2002. And we've taken that, expanded it as it's become very successful. We've brought in outside growers, Stagecoach Vineyard, Andy Beckstoffer, some other terrific vineyards to come in. And over time, we have a vineyard in the Coombsville area of Napa that will be a larger and larger portion of this over time.
I see. So how much of the fruit comes from the Quintessa estate versus the outside growers like Beckstoffer?
In the earliest years, it was essentially entirely, or almost entirely from the Quintessa estate, a little bit from our Coombsville vineyard. Over time, as it's expanded, the proportion of the Quintessa fruit has shrunk as the Faust program has increased. So we're buying more fruit and sourcing more from the Coombsville area.
I see. Is that because you're going for something different stylistically, or is it just a matter of increasing the production on Faust?
In this case, the production was increasing, and there were a limited number of tons of fruit available at the Quintessa vineyard anyway. And it's something where I have sourced vineyards based on a more classic Napa Cabernet style of wine, a big black fruit
Right.
jump out of the glass at you.
Absolutely.
That's essentially the style of Faust. But
Right.
with the finesse and elegance, nonetheless, that comes from a very gentle winemaking process.
I see. Yeah, no, I've tasted the 2005 vintage of Faust, and it was very, very bold, very concentrated, but the one thing that I liked was the use of oak was not over the top the way it is in, honestly, most Napa cabs for me. They're too much oak, and in this case, even though it was still very young, it was already kind of integrated, and it seemed to fit well.
Yeah, oak use at any percentage is something that still has to be balanced. And with Faust, it's about a third new French oak. The rest is once used Quintessa barrels, so certainly fantastic barrels.
So that's part one of my talk with Charles Thomas of Quintessa. Afterwards, I was able to taste some of the wines, and the Illumination Sauvignon Blanc was pretty much what you'd expect it to be. A classic Sauvignon Blanc from California, in that it's got plenty of fruit, but also it had a certain roundness to it that comes from the fermentation in concrete tanks. Makes it a little bit rounder than your really kind of typical grassy Sauvignon Blanc that has a lot of zing to it. And the nice thing about it is it's kind of unique. Normally when you find a California Sauvignon Blanc with that kind of roundness, it's usually because it was aged in oak. In this case, the concrete tanks kind of give it that somewhat more plush mouthfeel without adding the flavor of oak, which I think sometimes obscures kind of the unique character of Sauvignon Blanc. So here, you still have the nice crisp acidity that gives it a little zing, and has just that real freshness to Sauvignon Blanc without making it feel buttery like it's trying to be a Chardonnay. At $40 a bottle, Illumination Sauvignon Blanc is definitely a premium price Sauvignon Blanc. On the other hand, it's widely available in restaurants by the glass, so you might want to try it next time you're out having a bite to eat. Turning to Faust, I've actually tasted that wine several times now, and every time it's been a really bold, concentrated, just a really big Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley. Because Faust is such a big wine, it stands up nicely to even really flavorful foods. It would match really well with a grilled steak or even barbecue, and still have enough power to stand up to the flavor in the food. One note about the Faust is that it comes widely available in half bottles, and half bottles are a great option for several things. If you want to try a more expensive wine without paying such a high price tag, you can buy a half bottle and see if you like it. The other thing is, it's a great wine to bring for couples to a restaurant if you're doing BYOB, or just order a half bottle in a restaurant if you're not heavy drinkers or you just don't want to drink that much that night. So I'm a big fan of kind of taking advantage of half bottles where it makes sense. At $50 a bottle, Faust is definitely not an everyday drinking wine for most of us, but it's a nice special occasion wine. And especially with Father's Day coming up, if your dad likes that kind of big, rich style of California cab, you definitely might want to consider the Faust. Some other nice Napa cabs in the $50 and under price range would be the Joseph Phelps Napa cab. There's a number of Robert Mondavi cabs, including the oak fill bottling. And I also like the Provenance Napa cab at that price level. Another one to consider is Peju. If your dad likes cab with a bit more finesse, you might want to consider the Quintessa, which I'll be reviewing in the next episode of the Amateur Wino, together with showing you the rest of the interview with Charles Thomas. See you next time.